The city was buzzing with excitement. It was the night of the Big Innovators Gala, a huge event held in a fancy hotel ballroom in San Francisco. This wasn't just a party for rich people, it was a place where the smartest minds in technology met to show off their newest ideas. The room was filled with expensive suits, shiny diamond jewelry, and the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. Everyone was trying to impress everyone else. In the middle of all this noise and flashy behavior stood one man who seemed very different. His name was Keanu Reeves. Most people knew him as a famous movie star, but tonight, he wasn't here to sign autographs or walk on a red carpet. He was wearing a simple, dark suit that looked comfortable rather than expensive. He stood near the edge of the room, holding a glass of sparkling water. He watched the people with calm eyes, looking like a quiet observer in a chaotic world. While Keanu was being quiet, a man named Julian Thorne was doing the exact opposite. Julian was a millionaire who made his money buying smaller companies. He was known for being loud, aggressive, and loving the sound of his own voice. When he walked into the room, he didn't just enter, he took over the space. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, and he made sure everyone saw it. He had a group of people following him, laughing at his jokes even when they weren't funny. Julian found a spot right in the center of the room and immediately started holding court. He was speaking loudly about a recent deal he made to buy a robotics factory. He bragged about how much money he made and how clever he was. "I tell you, it's all about leverage," Julian shouted, gesturing with his glass. "These tech nerds think they know how to run a business, but they need guys like me to tell them what to do." The people around him nodded, but many of them looked uncomfortable. They were used to Julian's type big ego, small heart. Eventually, Julian's eyes scanned the room, looking for his next target or someone to impress. That's when he spotted Keanu. Keanu was standing alone near a tall table, sipping his water. He didn't have a crowd around him, and he wasn't waving his arms. To Julian, this didn't look like a famous actor or a successful investor. It looked like someone who didn't belong. Julian made a snap judgment. He saw a man in a plain suit who looked quiet, and in Julian's mind, that meant he was staff. A mean thought crossed Julian's mind. He wanted to prove to his friends that he was the boss of the room. He decided to pick on the quiet guy. He pointed a finger directly at Keanu and called out, "Hey! You over there!" The people nearby stopped talking. They looked from Julian to Keanu. Keanu looked up, surprised. He wasn't sure if Julian was talking to him, so he just glanced around politely. Julian didn't like being ignored. He took a few steps closer, a smirk on his face. "Yeah, you. The guy in the corner, don't be shy." The room grew tense. Several people recognized Keanu immediately, but they were too shocked to speak. They wanted to see what would happen. Keanu gently set his glass down on the table. He turned his body to face Julian. He didn't look angry or scared. He just looked calm, like he was listening to a noisy child. He raised an eyebrow slightly, waiting for Julian to continue. Julian took this as a sign of submission. He laughed, turning back to his group. "See, they know who's in charge." Then he looked back at Keanu with a sneer. "Since you're just standing there doing nothing, why don't you make yourself useful? I've been waiting for a drink for 5 minutes. Go get me a scotch. Top shelf. And don't be slow about it. I'm thirsty." A gasp went through the small crowd nearby. It was a rude thing to say to anyone, but doing it at a party like this was incredibly disrespectful. Everyone held their breath. They waited for Keanu to get angry. They waited for him to yell at Julian or call security. But Keanu didn't do any of that. He didn't shout. He didn't roll his eyes. He simply stood there, his hands resting calmly at his sides. He looked at Julian with a kind of pitying confusion, as if he was trying to understand why someone would act this way. He knew that getting angry would only make Julian happier. The best weapon against a bully is often silence. "Excuse me," Keanu said softly. His voice was low, but it was steady. It wasn't a question of what did you say but more of a why are you doing this. Julian laughed again, thinking Keanu was playing dumb. "You heard me. I'm Julian Thorne. I just bought the robotics wing down the street. When I ask for a drink, I expect to get it." He stepped closer, trying to use his height to intimidate the actor. He puffed out his chest, looking down at Keanu. "Go on, get moving." Chop chop. Keanu didn't move an inch. He just looked Julian in the eye. He could feel the anger radiating off the people watching. He knew that any second now, someone was going to step in and say something. He decided to give Julian one more chance to realize his mistake. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Keanu said in his friendly, natural tone. "I'm actually here with the Arcadia team. I'm not working the bar tonight." The silence in the room was heavy. You could hear a pin drop. Julian froze. He looked at Keanu's simple suit again, then at his polite face. Julian was so full of himself that he couldn't accept the truth. He couldn't believe that this regular guy was actually someone important. He thought Keanu was lying to save face. Julian's face turned red. He felt insulted that a waiter would lie to him. "Arcadia," Julian scoffed, waving his hand in the air. "That little tech startup, please. I know the guys who run that. They wouldn't hire someone like you to clean their floors, let alone be on their team." He turned to the people around him. "Is this guy serious?" He looked back at Keanu, his voice getting louder and meaner. "Listen to me, and listen close. In this world, money is power. And looking at that cheap suit of yours, it's clear you have neither. So stop pretending to be an investor and go get my drink before I have you thrown out for annoying the guests." The humiliation attempt was cruel. Julian wanted to break Keanu down in front of everyone. He wanted to show that he was the alpha male. But he had no idea who he was actually messing with. He was mocking a man who was worth millions, a man who was beloved by the public, and a man who had more class in his little finger than Julian had in his whole body. Keanu took a deep breath. He could have easily said, "Don't you know who I am?" He could have pulled out his phone and showed his IMDb page. But that wasn't his style. He didn't need to brag. He just stood his ground. "I'm sorry you feel that way," Keanu said simply. He picked his water glass back up and took a sip. He refused to be treated like a servant, but he refused to be a jerk in return. Julian was furious now. He was used to people trembling when he yelled. He stepped forward, getting right into Keanu's face, pointing a finger at his chest. "Don't walk away from me when I'm talking to you. I am the most important person in this room. You show me some respect." Just as Julian raised his voice to scream, a deep, commanding voice came from behind him. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" Julian spun around. Standing there was the chairman of the board for the entire event, a very powerful man in the industry. He had seen the whole thing. Julian smiled, thinking he was about to get back up. He straightened his jacket and pointed at Keanu. "Yes, actually. This waiter is being very rude. He's refusing to get me a drink. I think you should escort him out. The chairman looked at Julian, then at Keanu. A slow smile spread across the chairman's face. He shook his head slowly at Julian. The air in the room shifted instantly. The tables were about to turn. The powerful man standing behind Julian was Mr. Henderson, the chairman of the board for the entire evening and the head of the Arcadia Robotics project. He was an older man with silver hair and a face that usually looked kind, but right now, it looked like thunder. He had seen the whole ugly scene unfold from across the room. He watched Julian bully a guest, and now he was stepping in to stop it. Julian, thinking he had won the lottery, straightened his expensive tie. He assumed Mr. Henderson had come over to kick out the rude waiter who was annoying the millionaire. Julian pointed a finger at Keanu, looking smug. "Mr. Henderson, thank goodness you're here." "This man," Julian said, spitting the word out like it was poison, "is pretending to be a guest. He's been rude, he refused to get me a drink, and honestly, he's making a scene. Security needs to remove him immediately." The room went completely quiet. Everyone stopped talking to watch the drama. They all knew who Keanu was, but Julian was so loud and confident that some people actually started to doubt themselves for a second. They held their breath, waiting for Mr. Henderson to react. Mr. Henderson didn't even look at Julian. He ignored the millionaire completely. Instead, he walked past him as if Julian were a piece of furniture, and went straight up to Keanu. The contrast between the two men was striking. Julian was red-faced and sweating, screaming for attention. Keanu stood still, looking calm and collected. "Keanu," Mr. Henderson said warmly, extending his hand. "I am so sorry I left you alone for so long. I hope this gentleman hasn't been bothering you too much." Julian's jaw dropped. It physically hit the floor. He stood there with his mouth open, blinking rapidly. He looked at Mr. Henderson shaking Keanu's hand. He looked at Keanu standing there, accepting the handshake like he belonged there. The wheels in Julian's head were spinning, but they were stuck. He couldn't process what was happening. "It's no problem at all," Keanu said, his voice gentle. He shook Mr. Henderson's hand firmly. "We were just having a chat about the robotics industry." He was very passionate about his views. Mr. Henderson laughed, a short, dry laugh that told everyone he knew exactly what had happened. "I'm sure he was." He turned his gaze toward Julian finally. The warmth in his eyes vanished. "Mr. Thorne, was it?" Julian was still in shock. He pointed a shaking finger at Keanu. Wait a minute. You know him, this is the guy in the suit." "Mr. Reeves is not just the guy in the suit," Mr. Henderson said, his voice getting louder so the people around them could hear. "He is the lead investor for our new AI division. He is the reason this event is happening tonight. And frankly, he is the only reason we allowed you through the doors, given your company's reputation." The crowd began to murmur. People whispered to each other, pointing at Keanu. "Is that really him?" someone whispered. "Yes, that's Keanu Reeves," another replied. The mood in the room shifted from awkward tension to excitement. People were pulling out their phones, trying to sneak a picture without being obvious. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. The realization hit him like a bucket of ice water. He hadn't just bullied a random waiter. He had spent the last 10 minutes insulting one of the most famous and respected actors in the world. He had mocked a man who was worth more money than Julian could ever dream of. And he had done it in front of the most important people in the industry. He tried to recover. He tried to save face. Panic started to set in, making his voice crack. Well, I didn't recognize him, Julian stammered, putting on a fake, nervous smile. You know how it is. He looks different in person. I was just playing around. A little joke. Right, Keanu, we were joking. Keanu looked at him. There was no anger on Keanu's face, but there was no smile either. He just looked at Julian with a sad expression. It was the look you give a child who got caught with their hand in the cookie jar. It was a look that said, we both know that's a lie. There was no joke, Keanu said quietly. You asked for a drink. You said I didn't belong here. It seemed pretty serious to me. Julian's face turned bright red again. He felt small. He felt like everyone was laughing at him, and for the first time all night, they actually were. He looked at Mr. Henderson, desperate for a way out. Look, Mr. Henderson, this is just a misunderstanding. I'm a huge fan of his movies. I love the speed movies. I was just trying to break the ice. I think you've done enough, Mr. Henderson said sharply. He stepped between Keanu and Julian, creating a physical barrier. He leaned in close to Julian's ear, dropping his voice so only Julian could hear. I should have you thrown out for harassment. But I don't want to ruin the evening further. Stay away from Mr. Reeves. Stay away from the investors. And if I hear one more peep out of you, your company is blacklisted from this industry forever. Do you understand me? Julian nodded weakly. He couldn't speak. His throat was tight. Yes, he squeaked out. Good, Mr. Henderson said. He turned back to Keanu and placed a hand on his shoulder. Come on, Keanu. Let's go to the VIP lounge. The prototypes are ready, and I want to show you the new engine before we announce it. Keanu nodded politely. He didn't even look at Julian as he turned to leave. He didn't gloat. He didn't say I told you so. He just walked away with the chairman, leaving Julian standing alone in the middle of the fancy ballroom. As Keanu walked away, the crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. People reached out to touch his arm or shake his hand, whispering their apologies for Julian's behavior. They treated him with the respect he deserved. It was a stark contrast to how Julian had treated him just moments ago. Julian stood frozen. The people who had been laughing at his jokes earlier were now ignoring him. They turned their backs on him to get a glimpse of Keanu. He could hear them whispering. I can't believe he thought Keanu was a waiter, one person giggled. What a jerk, another said. Julian's hands were shaking. He looked at his expensive watch, then at his suit. None of it mattered anymore. His money, his power, his loud voice, none of it had saved him from looking like a fool. He had tried to assert his authority over someone he thought was below him, but he ended up destroying his own reputation. He quickly turned and walked toward the exit, wanting to escape the stares and the whispers. But the humiliation wasn't over. As he reached for the door handle, the master of ceremonies took the microphone on the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, the MC announced enthusiastically, we have a very special guest with us tonight who has been working tirelessly behind the scenes. Please welcome to the stage, the genius behind our new technology, Mr. Keanu Reeves. The room erupted in thunderous applause. Julian stopped with his hand on the door. He looked back to see Keanu standing on the stage, looking humble and shy as the crowd cheered. Keanu gave a small wave. He didn't take a bow. He just looked happy to be there. Julian opened the door and slipped out into the cold night air. The silence outside was a relief, but the knot in his stomach didn't go away. He realized then that money could buy you entry into a room like that, but it couldn't buy you class. And it certainly couldn't save you from your own arrogance. He walked down the street, passing a limousine that was waiting to pick up a VIP. He hailed a taxi instead, feeling smaller than he had in years. The story of his mistake would spread fast. By morning, everyone in the city would know that Julian Thorne was the man who mocked Keanu Reeves. He was the villain in a story where he thought he was the hero. Back inside, the party continued. Keanu was looking at a robot arm, asking questions about the gears and the software. He was treating the engineers with the same respect he showed the billionaires. He didn't care about status. He just wanted to do good work and be a good person. And as the night went on, it became clear that while Julian had the money, Keanu had something much more valuable. He had the respect of the room, not because he demanded it, but because he earned it. The applause inside the ballroom was deafening, like a thunderstorm that refused to break. Keanu stood on the wooden stage, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlights. He looked slightly uncomfortable with the attention, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He wasn't used to being cheered for his brain. Usually, people cheered for his punches or his car chases. But tonight, the applause was for his mind, his investment, and his vision. He gave a shy little wave to the crowd, a modest gesture that only made the people clap harder. In the VIP lounge, which was a secluded room separated from the main party by thick glass doors, the atmosphere was much more serious. This was where the real business happened. The room was filled with comfortable leather chairs, large screens showing data, and small tables with expensive snacks. Keanu walked in with Mr. Henderson, and the noise from the party faded into a dull hum. Keanu let out a long breath, happy to be away from the crowd. "I'm sorry about that scene out there," Mr. Henderson said as he guided Keanu to a private seating area. He looked frustrated. "Julian Thorne is a difficult man. He has too much money and not enough sense. I should have known he would cause trouble." Keanu sat down on a soft sofa and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He shook his head slowly. "Please don't worry about it," Keanu said, his voice calm and soothing. "Honestly, I've dealt with worse. It's just sad, you know. He thinks that because he has money, he owns everyone. He looked at me and didn't see a person. He just saw someone he could use." Mr. Henderson admired Keanu's attitude. Most wealthy investors would have demanded that Julian be thrown out or banned for life. They would have threatened lawsuits. But Keanu just seemed to feel bad for the guy. It was this exact quality that made everyone love working with him. He treated the janitor the same way he treated the CEO. "Well, let's forget about him," Mr. Henderson said. "We have big things to discuss. The board is ready to vote on the merger with your tech firm. But first, I want you to meet our lead engineer. He has been working on the stabilization code you helped us write last month." From the back of the room, a young man stood up. He looked very nervous. He was wearing a hoodie and glasses, and he was holding a tablet so tightly his knuckles were white. He walked over to Keanu, his eyes wide. "Mr. Reeves," the young engineer stammered. It is such an honor. I read your notes on the neural network interface. It was brilliant. It solved the latency issue we were having for months." Keanu smiled warmly. He stood up and shook the engineer's hand, holding it with both of his hands to show he was listening. "Thank you," Keanu said sincerely. "But you guys did the hard work. I just threw some ideas at the wall. Did the test run go well? The engineer's face lit up. He forgot his nervousness for a second as he started talking about robots and code. Keanu listened intently. He asked questions that were smart but not showy. He cared about the project. He wasn't just a name on a check, he wanted the technology to actually help people. Maybe make better prosthetics for people who lost limbs, or help in search and rescue missions. That was why he was here. Meanwhile, outside the glass doors, the party was winding down. People were whispering about Julian Thorne. The story was spreading like wildfire. Did you see his face when Henderson walked in? One guest whispered to another. I thought he was going to cry. The guests were enjoying the gossip a little too much. In the high-stakes world of Silicon Valley, seeing a bully get humiliated was the best entertainment of the night. But Julian wasn't gone yet. He had left the ballroom, but he hadn't left the building. He was standing in the hallway just outside the VIP lounge, pacing back and forth. He was angry, but he was also panicked. He realized he had made a terrible mistake. He had insulted one of the most powerful investors in the room, right in front of the chairman. Julian looked at his reflection in a shiny metal sculpture in the hallway. He adjusted his tie. Okay, he muttered to himself. Okay, damage control. I can fix this. I just need to talk to him. I'm a businessman. I can spin this. He convinced himself that if he could just get 5 minutes alone with Keanu, he could apologize. He figured Keanu was a nice guy type, right? Surely, a famous actor wouldn't hold a grudge. Julian planned to say he didn't recognize him, blame the lighting, and then offer to invest in Keanu's next movie. He thought money solved everything. He thought he could buy his way out of the awkwardness. He took a deep breath, straightened his suit jacket, and walked toward the glass doors of the VIP lounge. He put on his best "I'm a successful millionaire" smile, trying to look confident. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The conversation in the room stopped instantly. The young engineer froze. Mr. Henderson stood up, his face turning dark. Keanu turned around, looking at Julian with those same calm eyes. Julian, Mr. Henderson said, his voice dangerously low. This is a private meeting. You need to leave. Julian ignored him. That was his mistake, he always ignored the people he didn't think were important. He walked right up to the sofa, focusing only on Keanu. Keanu. Buddy. There you are, Julian said, his voice full of fake cheerfulness. I was just looking for you. I wanted to apologize for the mix-up earlier. You know how these parties are. Loud music, bad lighting. I honestly didn't recognize you without the, well, you know, the movie stuff. Keanu looked at him. He didn't say anything. He just waited. Julian kept talking, digging himself into a deeper hole. I'm a huge fan, truly. I've seen all your films. And I heard about your tech work. Impressive. I actually have some connections in Hollywood. Maybe we can do lunch. I'd love to talk about combining your fame with my business savvy. It was painful to watch. Julian was trying to use Keanu's fame as a way to make a deal, completely ignoring the fact that he had just treated Keanu like a servant 10 minutes ago. He still didn't get it. He still thought Keanu cared about his connections. Keanu finally stood up. He wasn't very tall, but in that moment, he seemed to tower over Julian. He looked Julian right in the eye. There was no anger, just a steady, heavy gaze that made Julian shift his weight uncomfortably. You offered me a scotch earlier, Keanu said quietly. You snapped your fingers at me. You told me I didn't belong here because of my suit. Julian laughed nervously, wiping sweat from his forehead. It was just a joke. Come on, Keanu. Don't take it so seriously. We're all friends here. I don't think we are friends, Keanu said softly. His voice was clear and strong. And I don't think you understand why I'm here. I'm not here for the fame. I'm not here to make deals with people who treat others like dirt. I'm here because I believe in the work these people are doing. He gestured to the nervous engineer and to Mr. Henderson. These are the people who matter. The people with the ideas. The people with the passion. You just have money, and money is the easiest thing to find in this room. The room was silent. The engineer was staring at Keanu with total admiration. Mr. Henderson had a small, proud smile on his face. Julian's face turned beet red. He felt like he had been slapped, but Keanu hadn't even raised his hand. The words hit harder because they were true. Julian realized that no amount of money could buy the respect these people had for Keanu. You're making a mistake, Julian stuttered. I can help you. Keanu shook his head slowly. I don't think so. I think it's time for you to go. Mr. Henderson stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Keanu. He pointed to the door. Mr. Thorne, if you do not walk out that door right now, I will have security remove you. And I will make sure that you are never invited to an industry event again. Do we understand each other? Julian looked from the chairman to the actor. He saw a wall of unity that he couldn't break. He realized that the game was over. He had lost. He opened his mouth to say one more thing, but nothing came out. He felt small. He felt empty. He turned around and walked toward the door. His expensive shoes squeaked on the floor, the only sound in the quiet room. He opened the door and stepped out, closing it gently behind him. Inside the room, the tension vanished instantly. The young engineer let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Keanu sat back down, looking tired but okay. Are you all right? Mr. Henderson asked gently. Yeah, Keanu said, rubbing the back of his neck. I just feel bad for him. He's going to wake up tomorrow and realize what a fool he was. That's a heavy feeling to carry. The engineer looked at Keanu in awe. Most people would have punched him, the engineer said. Keanu smiled, a sad little smile. Violence doesn't solve anything. And besides, he said, picking up the tablet again, we have work to do. Let's get back to the code. Show me that stabilization algorithm again. The group gathered around the table, their heads bent together in focus. In the hallway outside, Julian Thorne stood alone for a moment, listening to the sound of them working. He looked at his reflection one last time, then turned and walked away, leaving the world of real innovation behind him. He was a millionaire who had everything, yet tonight, he had walked away with nothing. The air in the VIP lounge felt lighter, as if a heavy storm had just passed and left the sky clear. But the calmness inside the room was deceptive. Just outside in the hallway, the consequences of Julian's actions were beginning to snowball. While Keanu, Mr. Henderson, and the young engineer went back to discussing the future of robotics, the real power players of the evening were assembling. Word travels fast in a room full of investors and tech geniuses. It moved like electricity through a wire. The story of the waiter who turned out to be the boss was the only thing anyone could talk about. The laughter had stopped, replaced by serious conversations and shaking heads. People were pulling out their phones, sending messages to their own boards, and checking their contacts. They were realizing that Julian Thorne had not just been rude, he had been reckless. Julian was standing near the bar in the main hall, trying to act like nothing had happened. He ordered another drink, his hand shaking just enough to splash a drop of scotch on his crisp white cuff. He tried to smile at a passing group of women, but they turned their backs on him, whispering behind their fans. He felt like a ghost haunting his own party. He was rich, he was powerful, but in that room, he had no friends. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the ballroom changed. The music cut out. The murmuring died down. A heavy silence fell over the crowd as the main doors swung open. A group of serious-looking men and women walked in. They weren't here for the drinks or the gossip. This was the board of directors for the Arcadia project, and they looked furious. Leading them was the head of the ethics committee, a man named Mr. Vance, known for being ruthless when it came to the company's reputation. Mr. Vance scanned the room, his eyes landing on Julian near the bar. He didn't say a word to anyone else. He walked straight toward him, the other board members trailing behind him like a dark cloud. The crowd parted to let them through. Everyone knew something big was about to happen. Julian saw them coming. He gulped hard, his throat dry. He put on his brave face again, thinking he could still charm his way out of this. He stepped forward to greet Mr. Vance. "Mr. Vance." "Good to see you," Julian lied, holding out his hand. "I was just telling everyone about the amazing work." Mr. Vance didn't take the hand. He stopped 2 feet away from Julian, looking at him with cold, dead eyes. He didn't even blink. "Quiet, Julian," Vance said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried enough authority to shut Julian up instantly. The silence in the room was absolute. 300 people were holding their breath, watching the drama unfold live. "You have caused a significant problem tonight," Mr. Vance said, his tone flat and dangerous. "We invited you here because we believed your company had value. We believed you were a professional. But your behavior toward Mr. Reeves was witnessed by everyone in this room." Julian tried to interrupt. "Look, it was a mistake. I didn't know who he was. If I had just..." Mr. Vance held up a hand, cutting him off. "It doesn't matter who he was. That is the point you seem incapable of understanding. You treated a human being like garbage because you thought he was below you. And it turned out he was the most important person in the room." Mr. Vance took a step closer, lowering his voice so only Julian and the people nearby could hear. "But there is something you don't know, Julian. Something that makes your little tantrum even more disastrous." Julian's face was pale now. What do you mean?" "Keanu Reeves isn't just an investor in our robotics division," Vance explained, a cruel edge to his voice. "He holds the primary patents for the stabilization algorithms. He owns the intellectual property that your company has been trying to steal for the last 6 months. You've spent millions trying to reverse engineer his code. You've been trying to buy his tech through third parties because he refused to sell to you directly." The shock hit Julian like a physical blow. He stumbled back a step. He suddenly realized why his engineers had been struggling to crack the code. They weren't fighting a computer, they were fighting Keanu Reeves. "You just mocked the one man on earth who holds the keys to your company's future," Vance continued. "And you did it in front of the people who control that industry." We can still make a deal," Julian stammered, his voice desperate. "I'll apologize. I'll offer him more money. I'll double it." Mr. Vance actually laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. You still don't get it? We don't care about your money. We care about character. And you have shown us exactly who you are. Vance turned around to face the entire room. He raised his voice so everyone could hear the verdict. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the board. As of tonight, the merger talks between Julian Thorne's company and Arcadia Robotics are officially terminated. Effective immediately, we are blacklisting his corporation from all future tech events and partnerships. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Then, slowly, the applause started. It wasn't polite clapping, it was raucous cheering. The people in the room were tired of bullies like Julian. They loved seeing justice happen in real time. Julian stood there, his heart pounding in his chest. "You can't do this!" he yelled, losing his cool completely. "I am a major player. You can't cut me out." "We can, and we just did," Vance said calmly. "And I suggest you leave before security decides to make an example of you. You are no longer welcome here." At that moment, the double doors of the VIP lounge opened again. Keanu stepped out. He hadn't heard the announcement, but he could feel the tension. He walked into the main room, and the crowd parted for him like magic. He looked at Mr. Vance, then at a sweating, panicking Julian. Keanu didn't look happy about the public shaming. He walked over to Mr. Vance and put a hand on his arm. "Hey," Keanu said softly. "Is this necessary? Can't we just let it go?" Mr. Vance looked at Keanu with immense respect. "Keanu, this man tried to humiliate you. He needs to understand that actions have consequences." Keanu looked at Julian. Julian looked terrible. His suit was wrinkled, his face was sweaty, and he looked like a man who had lost everything in a blink of an eye. Keanu felt a pang of pity, but he also knew he couldn't intervene. This wasn't his fight to stop, it was the result of Julian's own choices. "I just want to focus on the work," Keanu said. "I don't want a scene." "Then let him go," Vance replied. "But the deal is dead." Keanu nodded. He turned and looked Julian in the eye. "You should go," Keanu said gently. "It's over, Julian. Just go." It was the final word. The authority in Keanu's voice was undeniable. It wasn't the authority of a boss shouting at a worker, it was the authority of a good man telling a bad man to stop. Julian looked around the room. Every face was turned toward him, and every face was filled with satisfaction at his defeat. He realized there was no way back. If he stayed, he would just be humiliated more. He buttoned his jacket, though his hands were shaking so badly it took him 2 tries. "Fine," Julian muttered, not looking at anyone. This is a mistake. You'll all see." He turned and walked toward the exit. The crowd didn't part for him this time. He had to push his way through people who refused to move. They whispered insults as he passed. "Goodbye, Julian. Don't let the door hit you. Bullying doesn't pay." He reached the exit doors and pushed them open. He stepped out into the cool night air, leaving the warmth, the lights, and the future behind him. Inside, the party resumed. The music started again, louder and happier than before. The guests gathered around Keanu, eager to talk to him about the technology, not the drama. Julian stood on the sidewalk, hailing a taxi. He got in the back seat and slammed the door. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, he looked back at the hotel one last time. Through the glass windows, he could see people laughing and clapping. He saw Keanu in the center of the circle, smiling that humble, shy smile. For the first time in his life, Julian felt like the villain in a movie where the hero wins. And he hated it. He sank down into the leather seat of the cab, alone with his ego, while the city lights blurred through his tears. He had the money, but he had lost the room. The heavy wooden doors of the ballroom clicked shut behind Julian, closing with a sound that felt strangely final, like a book being slammed shut. Inside, the atmosphere had completely transformed. The tension that had gripped the room earlier had evaporated, replaced by a vibrant, electric energy. It was as if the cloud that Julian Thorne had brought with him had been lifted, and now the sun was finally shining through. The band started playing again, but this time the music was livelier, the jazz melody upbeat and full of joy. People weren't just standing around looking at each other anymore, they were mingling, laughing, and talking with genuine enthusiasm. In the center of it all was Keanu. The crowd that had gathered around him wasn't there because they wanted to take selfies or get autographs. They were there because they wanted to be near him. He was talking to a group of young investors, gesturing with his hands as he explained something about electric motors. His face was lit up with passion. He wasn't acting like a celebrity, he was acting like a geek who loves cool gadgets. The contrast between Keanu's simple, grounded nature and the flashiness of the party was striking. He fit in perfectly, not because of his money, but because of his authenticity. While the party continued to thrive inside, the scene outside was the complete opposite. Julian Thorne stood on the curb, the cold wind of the San Francisco night biting at his face. He shivered, but it wasn't just from the cold. He felt a deep, hollow pit in his stomach. He raised his hand to hail a taxi, but for a moment, none of the empty cabs seemed to stop. It felt like the universe itself was ignoring him. He finally managed to flag one down. A yellow taxi pulled over to the curb, and Julian quickly opened the back door and slid inside. The interior of the cab smelled like pine air freshener and old coffee. It was a stark contrast to the expensive, leather-scented limousine he usually rode in. He sank into the worn seat, staring out the dirty window at the hotel. Through the glass, he could see the lights of the gala flickering in the ballroom windows. He could see silhouettes of people moving around, clinking glasses, and enjoying themselves. In the center of it all, he could see a small crowd gathered around someone he knew was Keanu. "Where to, buddy?" the taxi driver asked. He was an older man with a gray beard and a tired face. He glanced in the rearview mirror at Julian. Julian hesitated. He didn't want to go home to his empty, penthouse apartment. He didn't want to face the silence. But he had nowhere else to go. "Just drive," Julian said quietly. "Take me to the financial district, I guess." The driver nodded and pulled away from the curb. As they drove, Julian kept his eyes glued to the hotel until it disappeared from sight. He replayed the events of the night in his head, over and over again. He saw himself pointing his finger at Keanu. He heard his own voice mocking the suit. He felt the sweat on his forehead when Mr. Vance announced the blacklist. "I ruined everything," Julian whispered to himself. He put his head in his hands. "Rough night?" the driver asked. He didn't say it mockingly, he said it with the casual sympathy of someone who has seen thousands of people have bad nights in the back of his cab. Julian looked up, surprised. He wasn't used to strangers talking to him unless they wanted something. "You have no idea," Julian sighed. "I think I just destroyed my career." The driver shrugged, keeping his eyes on the road. "Job is just a job, man. As long as you got your health, you can fix it. My wife, she always says, if you lie down with dogs, you wake up with fleas. You hang out with bad people, you get bad luck. Julian stared at the back of the driver's head. The simple wisdom hit him hard. He had been surrounding himself with yes-men and aggressive deal-makers for years. He had forgotten what it was like to just be a normal human being. He had been the dog that the driver was talking about, and tonight, he got bitten by his own fleas. Back at the hotel, the gala was reaching its peak moment. Mr. Henderson walked up to the microphone stand on the stage. He tapped the mic lightly, sending a soft feedback hum through the room. The crowd quieted down, looking up at him with anticipation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Henderson began, his voice warm and steady. "Tonight, we celebrate innovation. But innovation isn't just about chips and wires. It's about spirit. It's about seeing the world for what it could be, not just for what we can take from it." He paused and looked over at Keanu, who was standing near the edge of the stage. "I want to thank a very special friend of ours. A man who didn't ask for credit, a man who treated a bully with kindness when he could have used anger. Please join me in thanking Keanu Reeves." The applause was deafening again. It wasn't just clapping, it was a roar of appreciation. People cheered, whistled, and stamped their feet. Keanu looked down at his shoes, a little embarrassed by all the attention, but he was smiling. He stepped up to the microphone and motioned for the crowd to settle down. "Thank you," Keanu said, his voice echoing through the room. "But really, the thanks should go to the engineers and the dreamers. I just like hanging around smart people." He paused, looking thoughtful. "And to anyone out there who feels like they don't belong in the room, don't let anyone tell you that you don't. Suit or no suit, money or no money, you deserve respect." The room went silent for a second, and then people cheered even louder. It was a simple message, but it meant the world to everyone there. Meanwhile, the taxi drove through the city streets, passing under bright neon signs. Julian was watching the world go by, feeling like an outsider. He saw a group of young people laughing on a street corner. He saw a homeless man sitting on a bench with a small dog. For the first time in a long time, Julian saw these people as humans, not as obstacles or background characters. "You know," Julian said suddenly to the driver, "I was really mean to a guy tonight." The driver nodded. "Happens to the best of us." "What did you do?" "I treated him like he was nobody," Julian admitted, his voice cracking. "Turns out, he was the only person in the room worth knowing. And I was just noise." "Well," the driver said, glancing in the mirror again. "Sounds like you got a lesson. Expensive one, but maybe you needed it." Julian let out a short, sad laugh. "Yeah. I guess so." The taxi pulled up to the tall glass building where Julian lived. It was cold and imposing, a monument to his success that now felt like a prison. He paid the driver and stepped out onto the sidewalk. "Hey, buddy," the driver called out before he drove away. "Fix the suit. But mostly, fix the heart." Julian stood alone on the street. He looked down at his expensive jacket. He remembered how he had mocked Keanu's clothes. He realized then that clothes didn't make the man. Character made the man. And tonight, his character had been found wanting. He walked into the lobby of his building. The night security guard, a man named Sam who had worked there for years, stood up. Usually, Julian would just walk past him without looking at him. "Good evening, Mr. Thorne," Sam said tentatively, sensing the bad mood. Julian stopped. He looked at Sam. Really looked at him. He saw a tired man doing his job. "Hi, Sam, Julian said softly. Long night. Did you have a good evening? Sam looked stunned. He blinked a few times. Yes, sir. Quiet night, sir. Thank you for asking. Julian nodded and walked toward the elevator. It was a small gesture, a tiny drop of kindness in an ocean of bad behavior. But as the elevator doors closed, Julian felt a tiny bit of the weight lift off his shoulders. He knew he had a long road ahead to fix his reputation. He knew people might not forgive him easily. The board had spoken, and the industry had turned its back on him. But he also knew he couldn't go back to being the man he was that morning. He couldn't be the bully who mocked people to feel big. He had learned, in the hardest way possible, that true authority doesn't come from money or shouting. It comes from respect, humility, and how you treat the person standing next to you, even if you think they are nobody. Up on the top floor, in his lonely apartment, Julian poured himself a glass of water. He didn't want the scotch anymore. He walked to the huge window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere across the city, Keanu was probably riding a motorcycle or hanging out with friends, happy and free. Julian took a sip of his water and whispered to the empty room, "I'm sorry." It was the start of a very long journey, but for the first time, it was a journey in the right direction. The story of the millionaire and the movie star didn't have a fairy tale ending for Julian, but it did have a real one. And in real life, recognizing you were wrong is the first step toward finally becoming right.